Hi, my name is Meredith Lokan, and this is my mini lesson on the book The Name Jar, written by Yang Sok Choi. So, a little bit about the name jar. This is an authentic Asian American text, and it helps to depict aspects of Korean culture, such as foods, language, and values. One of the values that is present is the value of helping others. And the plot of this story is about a young Korean girl who moves to America, and her name is Uni. And she's on her way to school and is teased when the children on the bus ask her name. When she gets into school and her teacher introduces her, he asks her to say her name, and she tells her class she hasn't thought of a name yet. When she goes home from school, her mother asks her how her day was, and she explains that she doesn't like her name, but that she could understand the language that was being spoke in her classroom. When she gets to school the next day, she finds a jar on her desk with a bunch of pieces of paper in it. She realizes that her classmates have written name suggestions and placed them in the jar, hence the name jar for this book. Uni is still feeling discouraged, but then she receives a letter from her grandmother reminding her that she's thinking of her. Uni then goes to the market and meets a man who is also of Korean background, and when he asks her name, she proudly tells him what it is. When Uni goes back to school, she realizes one of her peers in the class thinks that her name is interesting. Finally, the following day, when she arrives back at school, she realizes that the name jar has gone missing. It is then, in that moment, that Uni gets the courage to tell her classmates her name. Once they find out her name, they are super interested in more Korean words and the Korean culture. The objective for this lesson is that students will be able to identify the story parts in the name jar by completing a puzzle story map with a group. My rationale for choosing this text is that it has a nice, simple plot that includes all of the pieces such as problem, solution, and conclusion. I also base this off the following second grade standards, and if you just take a moment, you can read them below. The following materials will be needed for this lesson. If available, copies of the name jar for each student or small group, writing or coloring utensils, and large blank puzzles. If you look below, this is a template of something that could be used to complete the project. The students will each have a puzzle piece that will be linked together to state the beginning, the problem, the solution, and the conclusion of the story. This is the procedure and application. So this book will be read over a period of a few days. Each day, the teacher will reread the story and kind of build a little bit more onto the idea of story parts. So just a little background. On day 2, the students heard the book a second time, and then the teacher sent them off into groups to discuss each part of the story. So the students would pull out of a hat one piece of paper, and on the paper it would either say beginning, problem, solution, or conclusion. And then those students on day 2 met with everybody that had the same story part on their piece of paper. So on day 3, before reading, the teacher will just remind them to pay attention to that beginning, problem, solution, and conclusion part of the text. During reading, the teacher will stop and have students talk about each part of the story map. And then after reading, the students will meet with one student from the previous day's group. So for example, each group will contain one person who on day 2 either discussed the beginning, the problem, the solution, or the conclusion. So that means every new group on day 3 will contain one child from each of yesterday's groups. The students will then work together to draw and create a story map that talks about the beginning, the problem, solution, and conclusion. They will include sentences and images as well. The effectiveness of this lesson is, I believe, by reading the text multiple times, students will be able to really understand the parts of the story. By not doing the project until day 3, on day 1 and 2, students can focus on just comprehending and listening and discussing with their peers. With that being said, the informal discussions on day 2 will clear up any misconceptions that the students have about the various parts of the story. And finally, students will be able to showcase their writing or artistic side or both by working as a team to create a story map that discusses those major parts of the story. Thank you for listening.